So we're now going to have a discussion on agentic AI. This is a follow-on from the AI discussion we had a couple of weeks ago at TADSummit, where we were focused on are LLMs going to replace SaaS? And of course, the answer is no. It's never one replaces the other. It's now you have to spend even more money to get what you were buying previously. But what I'd ask is everybody could introduce themselves and their relevance, what they do in the sort of voice AI, agentic AI sort of topic area. So we'll start with you, Paul, because you're the master of ceremonies in making this happen.
Hello, I'm Paul Sweeney. I am currently Chief Strategy Officer at Webio, and I'm a co-founder at the company, and we do conversational AI for credit and collections.
And do it very well, I must add.
Yes, we do.
Kane.
Thank you. I'm Kane Sims. I'm the founder of VUX World, which is a consultancy that helps organizations leverage AI effectively. You may know us from our podcast that we've been doing for the last 7 years, and we've been very active and vocal in this space, educating individuals and businesses around how they can leverage AI before AI was the thing that it is today, which is an incredibly exciting area to be in.
Yep.
It was back then, but it's even more exciting now.
Exactly, because it's sort of real, depending on your focus, you can actually do something with it. I sort of think back with TADSummit, we've been running for over a decade now. And Foxist, which is one of the companies that's been with us since the beginning, they were sort of voicemail, sort of a next-gen voicemail. They always said in their roadmap, AI was in there, but it was always something that, they said, but everybody sniggered a bit. But it's real. The vision happened a damn sight faster than they thought it was going to happen. But anyway, Steve, please introduce yourself.
So I'm Steve Tannick. I'm the VP Engineering for FuelIX, which is a TELUS digital platform. TELUS is a Canadian telco. TELUS Digital is sort of our global arm. And FuelIX exists to bring sort of intelligent employee experiences and customer support experiences through AI.
Excellent. That's clear. Thanks so much, Steve. So I guess I'll start with a very generic question, but the term is used, agentic AI. What does that really mean? So please, anybody jump in.
It's essentially a piece of software that uses generative AI to solve and conduct tasks largely in a manner that is largely free from human involvement.
Gotcha.
I would probably say that as a high level definition.
So when somebody says autonomous AI, are the two interchangeable?
What, autonomy and AI?
Well, because I've seen this term autonomous AI thrown out there. Again, because there's limited, because there cannot be no human interaction, because you've got to have guardrails, because otherwise crap's going to happen. So, do the two sort of interchangeable?
Well, I would say that any AI system ought to be autonomous in some respects. Even machine learning systems are autonomous in some respects. The whole point of training them is for them to be able to perform a function without human involvement. That's not to say that human involvement isn't needed in the application layer, if you like, to make sure that the use of AI is being used appropriately, safely, reliably, accurately, etc.
Gotcha.
But the whole point of an AI capability is for it to be able to do certain things autonomously, like classify speech or translate speech to text or whatever it might be.
Gotcha. Paul, Steve, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, we've been thinking a little bit about that. When I think about agentic AI, I can use a video game analogy here. It's a little bit like a game on rails, right? It's going to have some decisions, but it's on a track.
Yeah.
Whereas almost like a next level would be autonomous AI, where it's much more sort of an open world concept. It can do a lot more. And I think that's how we differentiate it internally.
That's a good analogy. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, because it is very guardrailed when you're playing sort of the AI within a game. But what we're looking at is a far broader application. Cool. Excellent. So what are some of the popular use cases that you see out there at the moment?
Well, I'll jump in and just give you an example of one of ours. So we we would use this kind of technology to do summarization, or very specific types of summarization for people and for the role that you're in. So you'd love to be able to go, okay, it's a part of an action flow, go and summarize. And the outcome of that might be, I want you to summarize this conversation and give me the best possible label for what's actually going on in this conversation. Which actually, if you think about it, isn't just giving you a summary. It's not. It's like giving you, hey, let's generate a shorter, briefer summarization of it. But it's also telling you, actually, if you run a summarizing agent, it could also do lots of other tasks with that outcome. And so you could say, hey, summarize, send it to an agent, and your goal is to set whatever the goal is. Your goal is to get this person the best, let's say, the most affordable and best payment outcome for them. Yeah. And then you send it to the system, and then it summarizes what's going on. It gives you summary saying this person's in, it seems to be this person is potentially financially vulnerable or health vulnerability or something else. Yeah. Because of that, I want you to automatically do something else again. I want you to go away and discover more about that vulnerability with that person. And then if that results in something, then something else happens again. But you haven't told the summary, hey, summary, and then do this, then do this, then do this.
Gotcha. Understood. So it's creating a summary or a label, because I think label's good because it's putting it in a category. And the category would be discovery of potential payment default because of the health vulnerability.
Yeah, you'd say in that circumstance, like we're doing a summary, but we had a brief chat before, Steve, about this. Like a summary might involve more than just what's being said in the conversation.
Yes.
It could be all the metadata around a conversation, and maybe even some ideas you might have about stages of conversation, or durations of conversation, or delays in conversation. You might put in things like typing errors. You might put in ability to sense reading age, and all these go into a summary. And so you're going, hey, I'm doing a summary, but the summary is more sophisticated than just text and tell me what's going on in the text. So this is where, when you get into conversations, you want to say to yourself, do I want to just send this to a third-party service and get back a summary of the text? Or do I want to actually get into some of the detail of how this is mashed together and figure out
almost like the
what's really going on?
Context for that conversation within the process that client or partner is on within your organization.
You're going to set off all the conversation people now by saying context, because context is like, it's all about context. You'll seem really smart when you say that.
So. Well, that wasn't my intent. But Kane, Steve, anything you like to add around that particular? Because with summaries, I always most of the summaries. Well, in fact, Kane, your Otter AI popped on before you joined us, and I find the summaries not that useful. So just interested, in your take around how do we get summaries working?
Yeah, well, Paul mentioned context there. Yeah. That's the thing that the challenge is that for Otter AI, for example, if Otter is in a conversation and it's listening to a meeting, for argument's sake, and it's trying to summarize that meeting, it doesn't really understand the topic of conversation, doesn't really understand the people in the room, doesn't really understand everyone else's roles and responsibilities. And therefore, when someone says we should do this thing, it can't really understand that that's actually an action that should be taken and put into the summary, because it lacks the context of everything else around the meeting. And that's the challenge of trying to create something that's a generic tool that's supposed to be used in all kinds of various scenarios, is that if Otter had a model that was specifically tuned on project management in the construction industry, then it would be a much difficult, a different output if you were using it for meetings in the construction industry. Exactly. But so that's the challenge essentially. Whenever I use Otter as well for doing these kind of things, it joins every meeting, and 9 times out of 10, when I'm going back to find out what the actions were, I'm just searching in the document to try and find out what it was, because it's difficult to have a generic tool that's trying to do everything for everybody, you know.
Exactly. And Steve, do you see that with your platform?
We do. And I think actually us all talking actually shows another great place where summarization matters. So if we all said, so I live in Vancouver, Canada, I guarantee we'd all say it slightly differently. And actually a really important function we see is this actually that sort of standardization, particularly when we're getting sort of personal information.
Yeah.
If somebody is saying where they're from or where they live, actually like it's not quite summarization here, but that interpretation of this is the tag we want for this location and getting that right time and time again. And whether that's voice or written, because we're also really good at typos, that's part of this. And that action there of listening and interpreting and making, in some ways, making the right guess that this is actually what we mean by that is a key part of what we look for and what we try and make sure happens very consistently.
Exactly. And I guess it's very important to get it tagged accurately, because that's PII. So you might need to redact it if you're sharing it with a broader organization.
It's exactly that. Correct. Understanding what is PII is something we spend a lot of time and effort on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, it's where it's being recorded. Is it in Europe? Is it in Germany? It's the different regimes can create quite a lot of difficulty. And of course, in the Middle East now, I'm seeing it's almost down to a country by country basis on the compliance you need to ensure. So one of the hot topics, and we discussed it back at TADSummit earlier this month, was speech to speech. So no longer, basically having to go through, you're doing the speech to text and then doing, all the guardrails and all the rest in the text domain, but doing it within the speech to speech domain. I'm interested in your take on, is it the future? What are the challenges and how long do you think it's going to take, if it is potentially the future, for it to become the default way?
It depends on the use cases for me. I think speech to speech is like everything else, which is that there's a place for it. There's a really great technology company called Tomato AI.
Yeah.
And what that does essentially is it has a speech to speech model. It's a bit more sophisticated than that, but essentially what it does is if you are, let's say, based in the Philippines and you answer a call from a contact center, but you're talking to somebody in America, it will take your tone, is in the tone of your voice, replicate your voice exactly, but the accent that comes out of the other end will be American. So rather than dealing with the language barrier and people not speaking English as a first language or whatever, it's using speech to sort of essentially democratize all conversations, no matter where your agents are based. So I think that's a really effective use of that kind of technology. But again, it's not going to be for every single contact center, because not every contact center has people in different parts of the world that speak English as a second language,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think translation is an interesting one. I think we're probably a little bit away from that being reliable at scale for high volume use cases. I think for low volume, long tail use cases, I can see that getting some legs at some point in time. But translation is a very tricky area.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there's lots of, outside of the customer experience, there's some great technologies out there, like Respeecher, for example. Their speech-to-speech models are being used in like Disney productions for recreating William Shatner's voice when he was 20-year-old and all this kind of stuff. Like, there's some amazing stuff out there. It's just finding the right use cases for it. And the best I've found so far is Tomato. Tomato.
Interesting. I'll check that one out. I'd heard it, but I didn't realize it was getting used there. Steve, given what you're doing, I guess I sort of put it in the category of like CPaaS AI, because you've got all the infrastructure and you enable agents to be added on at scale. So interested in your view on this sort of transition possibly we're seeing in the market from the sort of old text-based to speech.
Yeah, and I think we're very bullish on this. I think this is definitely where things are going. I think right now, voice to voice is sort of cost prohibitive at scale.
Yes.
And that's a major factor. And it's funny, one of the things that we think about a lot, we also have like clean energy commitments as a company. And one of the things we think about is actually like the additional compute used for voice versus text. Because when we do these calculations, we actually include compute costs as well. And it's not just the dollar cost. And this is sort of always this problem as we do more and more. How do we balance that? And so what is the right value of the conversation that you want to have voice to voice? But in general,
Exactly.
this multimodal of any kind, more abstractly, is coming more and more, and honestly, way faster than I imagined. So,
Yeah, it's still
Well,
not there. It's like you have a voice interface or you have a text interface, and the two don't mix at the moment with OpenAI, at least. So
yeah,
there's still
yeah.
two very
And you can
distinct.
go a long way with voice to text and text to voice right
Yes.
now.
Yeah.
So, we can work around things.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah. And
how are you defining speech to speech here, Alan?
it's basically what OpenAI launched with. So they don't take it back to text.
Mm.
It's being recognized from, I can't remember the word they use for it. Paul, you can help me out here, but it's
Is it phenomes?
yes, exactly.
All
So
right.
it's
Oh, so basically, it's speech to intent. It's basically it's so I don't know if you know, Speakeasy and
yeah,
SoundHound both had this
yes,
technology a while back. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair enough. I thought you meant speech to speech as in translating or transcreating or recreating speech in real time, like Respeech Automato. Um, I think if you're talking speech to intent, which is classification based on speech alone, that's been in existence for
yeah,
quite a
yeah,
long
yeah,
time. You know, like you
yeah,
speak
yeah.
easy, as I said, speak easy and
I,
SoundHound, and what SoundHound demonstrated probably in 2018 was stuff that. Uh, Large language models aside, most other traditional machine learning models couldn't do in a million years. They were demonstrating things where you could say stuff like, let's say you were to call a restaurant and you would say that I'd like to order, you know, 60, I don't know, three chicken madras curries and two poppadoms, and also actually not two, rather than three chicken madras, let's make it two chicken madras, and can I get delivery in the next half an hour? So no one really talks like that, is the reality, but as a demonstration of technical prowess, it's quite a convincing thing. But even those companies actually they ended up still doing text to speech in the background as a
Yeah.
sort of quality
Yeah, yeah,
assurance
yeah.
measure
No,
to
because
make
what I'm
sure that they weren't.
referring to is the latest release that came out of OpenAI. I can't
Mm.
remember what it was. Um,
I
oh,
think it's called real time voice. I think they
real
Yeah,
called
time
real
it.
time
voice.
voice. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's the
I
shift.
I think just on the Steve, just to get back to the agentic stuff, um, we were having a talk previously about how people may not understand what's going on when you ask a question, and like what happens after that that makes it kind of agentic. Maybe it would be interesting for you to talk about your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think trying to look up more additional information, right, to provide information is really really useful. And that coming back out to be able to, if I'm a really helpful thing we think if I'm a call center agent, I'm going to have, I often have to have a breadth of access to information to answer questions from people. Being able to have that happening live in the background and feeding me that, so that I have sort of the quick notes about any topic to give me that information to have better context about what a customer might be calling for, is an incredible way to make the job of working there a lot better. Providing additional tools to help me get answers quicker, providing that action to go take customers beginning to talk about X, immediately go look up. And of course, the magic here is like, when is a customer done talking about a topic to go look it up? Figuring out what, I guess context again, the context of a pause in speech matters a
Yeah.
lot. Are we changing topic? Should I go ask a question of systems now? But this is exactly like that type of action of listen for something that feels like a complete statement,
Hmm.
go get additional information so that I can then improve the whole conversation loop between two humans talking with agentic assist. Is an interesting place that I would say we definitely don't have the art solved at this point,
Hmm.
but active work and beginning to show really really good things happening.
So is that like where you're using RAG to assist the agent? Okay.
Exactly that, yeah. So there's a giant knowledge base, right?
Yeah.
And you just want to go get it. So if I'm calling about a cell phone bill, or I don't understand an offer or anything like this, uh, asking a frontline worker to have all this deep institutional knowledge is really, really hard.
Yes.
being able to provide them that deep institutional context as needed on demand, just in time, is a vitally important part of how we're going to help make this, in some ways, make the job of being a call center worker better.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's a good point. And I guess that sort of overlaps a little bit with the whole co-pilot sort of scenario and the challenges that we've seen. And I have to be honest, with well, some of the big name co-pilots, people have been, shall we say, a little negative on their experiences so far. Why do you think that's the case?
Crap in, crap out most of the time, quite honestly.
I'm glad you're the one who said that, yes.
Yeah. I think there's most of it is that from the experiences I've come across is that it's the same as any other project, basically. It begins with the wrong intention. It begins with the intention of building a co-pilot rather than the intention of solving a problem.
Yes.
And so if you just want to build it because it's cool, then you can build it because it's cool. But if you haven't really found the right problem to focus it on, it's not going to be successful. It's not going to be used. I think that's the first problem.
Yeah.
The second problem is that it depends what you mean by co-pilot. So that example Steve just gave, some companies call that a co-pilot.
Yeah.
Some companies call a co-pilot something that sits there alongside you and helps you code. Some people call a co-pilot something that'll sit there and help you organize your day more effectively. So it actually depends what you actually mean by co-pilot. But most of the time, when I've seen, for example, the Microsoft examples of where I've seen that kind of fall flat on its face, it's purely because either it started with the wrong intention or it hasn't been given sufficient data to be able to do a good enough job, essentially.
Gotcha.
I don't know if this is part of the topic of conversation for today, but that's the biggest gap I see, even with not just agentic, but with certainly with RAG solutions as well, is that the biggest failure basically is this expectation that just take data from anywhere, throw it into a vector database and expect the language models to do the rest is a total fallacy. It's more of a content management project than it is a technology project.
Exactly. 100%. 100%.
We see a lot of that. Jack of all trades, master of none is a real problem.
Yeah.
So internally, we tend to call these things assistants. In part to get around Microsoft's branding of everything there. But it's funny, we've really found giving people the ability to go create an assistant where they're creating with localized context just what they need. And being able to string these together. Gotcha. So we found a lot of I want to rag against just a very small set of documents that's very sort of tightly coupled on a particular topic. Yeah. And that can just go talk to another assistant to go talk about another topic. Gotcha. And that stringing together and sort of not having, I'm going to call it an institutional opinion on an assistant, but giving access to anyone to just go cook by themselves. Yeah. I think we're finding like a really happy path there where I think one problem we're going to have is, too many assistants. There's going to be, a marketplace of thousands. And what's one, everyone's built their own variation of something, but there's also no issue with everyone having a highly individualized set. So
exactly, because we're all different, and and you'll mostly have a number of agents helping you depending on what category you're working on. You could be dealing with technical issues, then you could be dealing with sort of commercial issues or contract issues. So you can tune each to help you, and in time, because of the context of the conversation, you go, well, this is a contract issue, and then pop into there. And then, but could always have the technical listening in the background so that when it hops over into basically because of that contract issue, we now need to understand how we can solve, it could be a construction project and it's say it's for a large brand, but what the building is an internal store for employees. Then it brings in all the construction issues associated with that, but within the context of L'Oreal internal. So it's I think multiple agents, and in fact, I was having a chat with Clerk Chat, really interesting company. Again, it's an agent. You plug into a whole range of different messaging platforms, and they use multiple agents dealing with integrations, dealing with different third-party providers to make it as seamless as possible for a business to get a particular service up and running. So definitely, I think multiple agents. I'm seeing that pop up time and time again because it just constrains the problem. And as long as you can get that right agent on the right part of the discussion, it can be very effective for the call center agent.
The challenge there basically is orchestration.
Yes.
And also it depends on how you define agent, because a lot of what you see out there as people calling agents, they're essentially rule-based bots that are called agents now because it's cool, which is fine. But like, and you don't always need an AI agent for a problem. If it's a simple problem that can be solved with rule-based systems, then that's not a problem whatsoever.
Exactly.
But the same challenge agents will face is the same challenge that traditional bots have faced, which is that when companies like Eon, for example, took the approach of building a separate bot for different departments, they realized that customers don't realize that it's a different bot for a different department because the customer just sees Eon.
Yeah.
Therefore, they start talking to one bot and that bot's acting stupid because it can't do that thing. And then all of a sudden they're in this situation where they're saying, well, we can do that thing, but it's just in a different bot. So how do we then orchestrate it together? So then they put this orchestration layer on top, which is trying to get people into the right bot. And it can be quite difficult to do that. And then the question is, well, actually, if we look at this stuff, we've got 18 different bots and they all share 60% of the same intents or 30% of the same knowledge base. So, I concur that there will be individual agents that do individual tasks. And I think some of those agents, even within one process, will be orchestrated together. But there's also going to be a requirement for an orchestration layer across the top that can get the customer into the right agent, or whatever that solution is, because it might not be an agent. It might be that for this particular thing, you're better off just going to the website and using this form because it's going to be far quicker. So the orchestration bit is a bit that will be a very interesting area in the next few years.
I think you've hit on a really interesting thing, which is there's a world of difference between an assistant or an agent or a bot that is for yourself or a very small, like contextually similar group of people versus for the general access. And I think I wonder if that's one of the places where we'll see that sort of differentiation. Because like managing intent is so hard when you have some type of inbound information that you have could be anything. And that orchestration is extremely difficult. And whether it's people doing it or it's some old IVR system or it's something modern, we see time and time again that humans are completely unpredictable, right? No matter what we're doing, we're guaranteed going to find the edge case that is not being handled. And it's tricky. And I think that front layer of how we have broad access that maybe itself knows it doesn't have the answer to hand off might be part of that. But exactly that orchestration layer. It even we found internally how we think about sort of a public access assistant versus a sort of personal access assistant, how we treat it, how we build it, what guardrails we bring to it are vastly different. Those are beginning to actually diverge in interesting ways, I think.
That's a good point. Because again, when it's internal or it's for yourself, you can tolerate far greater error rate, and if it's something that it's gone off, it's not necessarily hallucinated, but it's making an assumption that's wrong, and you can just ignore that. Well, for a public, everything that's said is Bible. So as a result, you have to basically ensure that it's following a particular process. But Paul, one of the reasons we're doing this is because the previous panel discussion went a little everywhere. So we're trying to bring it back down to a focus on agentic. So, we're coming up, on the half hour. So I'm just interested on what further points you'd like to raise before we bring this to a close.
I just think we were talking there about the orchestration, and I think that we're just kind of 2024 really was the kind of semi-maturing of the early stages of the early maturity of orchestration, like LangChain or DSPY or DIPSY, as I called it. But anyone who's really working with them goes, it's just not really there. To use out of the box, and people are going to have all their little flavors and differences and stuff. So we still have a way to go on the orchestration layers, getting to any sort of a standard that you'd then be able to make interoperable.
Exactly, but I see that as a strength for the smaller companies in this space. They don't need it cooked. As long as it's good enough, they can craft it to a particular problem, like Webio has. You basically cook everything so it's spot on for your particular problem.
But that's a kind of a feature of an early market, right? Is that you have to do that, and as the tools mature, you got to leave things go and figure out which bits you need to do yourself. I think the bit that like around 2-3 years ago, I remember someone asked me, what am I worried about? And I said, transformers, like they're going to change things. And you could, if you were tuning in, you kind of, something big is going to happen here. And for me, the thing that I'm not worried about, but the thing that preoccupies me is reasoning. And reasoning is going to be the problem that if it gets cracked, then everything changes. If it doesn't get cracked, then things start to kind of fall apart a little bit. And I think it's one of those make or break things. So when we talk about, we had an interesting brief conversation, Steve, about that layer of when you ask a question and the systems goes off and it goes, hold a second, acting as somebody who knows about this area, I would be looking for the following kind of points. So I'm going to prioritize those points, and I'm going to check those points against external databases, which can prove the thing that I'm inferring about. And I'm going to come back with an answer, and all that's going to happen in a millisecond, right? Or a nanosecond. It's going to be really, really fast. So layers of reasoning and validation and checking is occurring in a time frame that is kind of astronomically small, if that's an oxymoron. And I think what's going to happen is that work either becomes super, like, imagine a complete neural network of actions happening instantaneously, and all of them doing tasks, all of them checking each other, all of them looking for validations against other databases or sources of truth. And then they come back to you with something that seems like a perfectly reasonable answer, and that you say that's probably more accurate than a person. Like, and that could be anything. And the thing that, to just take a little sidestep for a second, that I remember looking at a video for drone technologies, right? And so I say, what are you going to use? What are the drones doing? And this company in America, it flew drones around areas, household areas, and it took a picture of your house, and it did it from a couple of angles. It figured out the angle of the sun. It figured out where you were, elevation, all the rest, and it generated a brochure and leaflet of what your house would look like with the sun panels on them, with the solar panels on them, give you estimates of how much you could expect to generate and how much that would save from your bill. And it says, and we can do that for you next Thursday or next week. And here's the tax deductible stuff. I'm not making that up. Like, that's a real thing that happened like 5 years ago, right? With people who figured out what drones would do. And the reason I say it is, I think what's going to be interesting is where this trend of LLMs and the reasoning that they become capable of hitting other areas or joining with other disruptive areas and creating like new types of services that you'd never have imagined.
But it's a big leap, though, when you're saying reasoning.
It's a big leap, but that's why I'm saying, like, if you go back to 1995, right, and you imagine, go back in time, right, and someone told you about the internet, and they went, "Oh, it's really great. You can see this message board, and you kind of get the sports results for your local teams. It's awesome. Like, I don't have to phone someone up and tell." And no concept of the fact that because this was massively networked, and because the bandwidth was going to grow and grow, then some exponential things were going to happen. And what we're not connecting here, I know everyone kind of who's a thought leader and all these other guys, this is going to get bananas really soon because we're thinking exponentially. But the problem with exponential thinking is no one can really, as a human being, conceptualize an exponential issue. They just can't. It's just not the way our brains work.
Exactly.
Right? So I think that when we talk about agentic stuff, it's in the same. I think it's like thinking about it as, hey, if a network is able to infinitely expand by adding another kind of IP address to it, what happens? Okay. Now, if you think about that like agentics, and you say, hey, if an agentic thing was able to kind of expand, and there was a concept similar to bandwidth, like what's its concept for bandwidth, and that expands, now what happens? And that's what. Sorry,
go for it, Kane.
No, go on. No, carry on. Yeah.
No, that's it. That's my rant.
No, but
I think that's
Kane.
Yeah.
Steve. Get interested in your views.
No, I think it's a really good point, because do you remember the Google DeepMind experiment when it beat is it Nadell? Is it Nadell? Lee Sedol, who beat him at Go. Not the chess one, the Go player, Lee Sedol, I think his name was. And in the first game, what happened was, I don't know how to play Go, but in this move that the AI made, apparently it was just the most out there, craziest move that no human would have ever made. And it just put this checkpoint at the top corner of this board, and it's out the middle of where the actual gameplay is and stuff like that. And everyone was like, what's going on? Like, is this system malfunctioned or whatever? As the game unfolded, that move proved crucial in that AI system winning that game. So it kind of is to Paul's point, which is that you can't necessarily predict what these things will do if they're allowed to do these kind of things. And so if an AI system can make a prediction of this move being the right move at that moment in time that ends up winning the game, potentially it can also then predict a service offering or something similar that you might not have thought is a good idea, but proves to be a good idea in the long run. I think a near-term example of that would be something like, let's imagine that you are a telco company and somebody calls up and they are, I don't know, they want to move house. So they're saying, I'm going to move from this place to that place. That's a fairly straightforward conversation to have. You probably don't need agentic AI for that. You can use that. You can use traditional machine learning for that kind of thing. I'm moving from here. I'm going to go to there. It's going to be on this date. Job done. Now they move to that place and the internet hasn't been turned on. So they call back. Hey, I was supposed to go from this place to that place. Why isn't it turned on? At that point, every single bot more or less will break because something has gone on that's outside the realms of its purview, and you've got to speak to a human. The human will do it. Now, wherever the human gets that information from, that information exists somewhere. So you could feasibly have an agent there that goes and does some investigating to figure out what's actually gone on here, and then can say, okay, I'm sorry about that. It's because of this reason that hasn't happened, but it's going to happen on this reason, and I've also escalated the priority of this in the queue, so it's going to be looked at by a colleague tomorrow. So there's a way that and that's a really simple view. But then let's imagine that later on, 6 months down the line, I call back again. Now, what the humans won't do is they won't necessarily say, oh, well, this person complained 6 months ago, therefore, or this person's been with us for 15 years, therefore. They'll just treat that call like a normal call. Whereas if you had something in the middle that said, well, actually, I know this person complained 6 months ago. I know they've been a customer for 15 years. Now there's another complaint. The reasoning kind of side of things is that if the human had that information, whatever that complaint is, maybe they want to cancel their contract because they're not happy about the internet speed or whatever. The human in that situation might use a little bit of grace, and they might say, well, look, John, you've been with us for 15 years. I'm really sorry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to knock $5 off your bill for the next 12 months. And so the reasoning of getting towards that is weighing up the decision of how valuable is this customer? How much is their lifetime value? How much have we cocked up in the past? And what's the right thing to do to repair that relationship? And so what that enables you to do is to have those kind of agentic AI systems potentially in those areas. And the reason why that's a good example of an agentic AI system is because it puts automation, or it puts technology in places where previously it was totally out of bounds. And what it enables you to do is it enables you to consider automating things that were previously untouchable. And another example of that would be like, I have a podcast that we've been doing for the last 7 years. Every time we do a podcast episode, there's a transcript that gets done. Now, someone has to go through that, turn it into an article, write a topic, write a title, write a summary, all that kind of stuff. Now, this technology gives us the opportunity to say, right, take that transcript, take the transcript and figure out what topics were discussed. Now go and do a web search and figure out whether there's been any content covered in this space that covers those topics. Take the ones that haven't been covered yet, take the content of the podcast and write an article about each of those topics. Then create an image that matches those topics, create the titles, the meta descriptions, do a quick bit of research on the SEO viability of this thing as well. See what the search results pages are coming back with for these type of things. Do you know what I'm saying? So all of a sudden you've got this whole pipeline of activity that can create something from nothing.
Yeah.
And that was previously an untouchable space for automation because it's all involved humans.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, and that's a near term, that telco example is probably a bit far fetched for these days, but it's just as Paul was saying, an exponential increase. That these examples are not exponential increases.
No.
These are like 2 steps away from where we are now. And so all you can do is to imagine like what the next step is and the next step is, and it's it can get pretty interesting pretty quickly.
That's very clear. Yeah, absolutely. And Steve?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot about in this space is how do we, we want to help people do things. So, and where we found that agents and agentic AI is so helpful is take away, I'm going to call it the support toil in order to get to the problem to be solved. If you take this example of article, right? Like the actual problem you want to solve is get an article out and you want to think about it. You have the podcast as sort of maybe the high level function activity, but all of that research is sort of support work for the problem you're actually trying to solve. Writing code, actually, we see this a lot where we see high acceptance rates is on configuration and test management and things like this. And we have lower code acceptance on some of the actual code writing. And again, we're handing off the things that get in the way of, I'm going to call it the interesting problem to chase. And I think more and more of that is already here, and our ability to string ever more steps together is actually where we're seeing a ton of growth, where it's easier and easier and easier to take any step that previously you'd have to go do something yourself and automate that out. So very much building the same thing with Kane. I'm going to maybe a little bit of that idea of moves, which is one of our biggest problems is no 2 properties are identical. But when I move, I want my internet, I want my security, I want all my channels, I want everything set up the same, I want my passwords to be moved over. And there's nothing technically preventing us from doing that, except that it's extremely difficult to do. And it's exactly the type of thing that we think that we can have systems go do this work. And I think we're actually further away from the unhappy path than the happy path. But there's a lot of these things where when you start to break out an ostensibly simple step, move house, there are so many steps in there sort of buried underneath that we can just automate away what are currently like minor hassles. But I think there's actually, there's just a ton of value in the world in just removing minor hassles everywhere we come across them. And I think that's one of the great promises of agentic AI, really. That, and I think the next place that I'm hoping we'll see more is right now it's often, I'm going to call it virtual hassles. And I think, the drone example is a great place where I think we're going to see more and more, let's call it real world hassles that we can apply agentic AI to go do things for us. And that's what I'm really interested to see where this space goes.
Great. No, that was a really nice way of wrapping it up. I must admit, Paul, when you said reasoning, I was a little bit, okay, it's Paul. But now, with Kane and Steve providing those next steps that okay, I get it. And then you go, oh yeah, and it is exponential, like Paul was saying. Damn. So I think that's a nice way of wrapping up where reasoning, I think, is a viable thing to be discussing with agentic AI. So again, guys, this is really insightful, great fun, and again, thank you for giving us some of your time.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.